Welcome to the 1905 podcast. Joe and I have been going to Stamford Bridge for over 30 years. For the past 3 years, we've been exchanging voice notes on everything from the highs in Porto to the lows of Potter. Each week, this podcast will take you inside our unfiltered thoughts on all things Chelsea, sharing our view from Gate 13 of the Matthew Harding stand. Let's hit the notes. After months of speculation, Conor Gallagher has left Chelsea for Atletico Madrid, with striker Samu Omorodion coming the other way. In this episode, we talk about the move that has divided Chelsea fans and find out what we can expect from our new striker. We also look at what went wrong against Real Madrid and what we hope to see against Inter Milan. Let's start with a voice note from Joe on Conor leaving his boyhood club.
I've just seen the news on Gallagher, actually, which is a bit sad. Well, it's actually more than a bit sad. I'm a bit pissed off of it, quite frankly. Just I think the way it's been handled has not been very good. This whole thing where there was a deadline and you kind of knew that potentially if there was no movement from Chelsea over the weekend that it was probably going to happen, because we said on episode 1 or 2 that we thought Gallagher was potentially on the chopping block, and along with Chalobah, who hasn't left yet, but looks like he's going to leave pretty soon. But I just find it really poor taste that that some supporters are quite, almost like clapping and cheering that he's going. There's plenty that aren't saying that. I will, defend the people that are giving him, all the credit he deserves, because he's been nothing short of sensational for us. Remember when Reece James and Ben Chilwell couldn't stay in the field, but this guy came in as a makeshift captain, never captained a club before. He's barely, in some ways, barely played for the club before. He only had one season before this. And turned into captain for us and put in some absolutely man of the match performances almost every week. Gallagher was someone who, he's not just reliable, but with this season just gone, he turned his whole game around. He scored goals, he created goals, he put in lung-busting performances. He worked his backside off to get up and down the field to play for that badge, which everyone keeps going on about. Play for the badge, play for the badge. You see it on social media all the time. Oh, no one plays with the badge anymore. Yes, they do. And we've just got rid of one. It really frustrates me. We've kind of let the guy walk for 34 million, which, look, that's probably not a bad sum, actually, when you consider he's only got, I think, 1 year left in his contract after this. So it's probably about market value. But he's an England international. And whether you like that or not is irrelevant. He's an England international. And I just think that we could have used him, but the trouble is, like I said before, I wouldn't want to see him sit on the bench for 75% of the games next season and just come in for the odd Mickey Mouse game where we kind of want to rest players. He deserves way more than that. I really hope he comes back to the Bridge one day and he gets some applause and gets his cheers, because he thoroughly deserves it. I've got nothing but respect for that guy. He's literally been such a shiny light on a bit of a doom and gloom sort of time around Chelsea, and just kind of saddens me a little bit that we're letting him go. But look, I can't change it, you can't change it. I think Clear Lake haven't dealt this one brilliantly, I must admit, but unfortunately, if you spend big in the transfer market on certain players that haven't come off, and you can argue Mudryk, you can argue one or two others, this is what happens, unfortunately. But the model is that PSR is there, and would you want to see the club lose 10 points next season? Or 12 points or 15 points? No, is the answer to that. I'm really not happy about it. But I'd just like to say, lastly, anyone who knocks this kid, you should be ashamed of yourself. Because if you had the chance, if you're a proper Chelsea fan, and you had the chance not to only just play 2 seasons and captain your club for basically a whole campaign, tell me you wouldn't take that chance, and tell me you wouldn't be the proudest guy in the room, because just frankly I find it just really, really upsetting that we're kind of letting him go for what feels like it feels like a free transfer in some ways, because when Mount left last year, I didn't care. I just didn't care. I don't know why. I'd run my course with Mount. I just knew in the press he was going to leave. He was saying all the wrong things. He did all that kind of kiss in the badge nonsense, like I said before, after all the games last year. Then you just had the feeling towards the end of the season, he basically made up his mind and he was going. That's not proper Chelsea. Gallagher doesn't want to leave the club. The club are getting rid of him, which is really, really sad. But look, we can't change it. But there's some great players in that position. It's not their fault. It's not Lavia's fault. It's not Enzo's fault. Casado's fault. It's not their fault. But it is still a sad day, and I'm just a bit pissed off.
I feel a little bit softer actually on the Gallagher side of things, and maybe a little bit more on the side of the club on this one, and I'll explain why. I mean, first thing to say is that I absolutely wanted Gallagher to stay, would have loved him to have stayed. I think he's a fantastic player and also exactly the sort of character that actually we need more of at Chelsea. So I just wanted to make that really clear. I would have wanted Gallagher to stay and would have absolutely loved him to have signed the new contract. But I think that contract point is really valid here. He, by all accounts, had 2 offers in front of him, which he was weighing up right until the end, which was the offer from Chelsea over basically a 3-year deal and the offer from Atletico, which he was negotiating hard on. And it sounds like he's got up to 200k a week going to Atletico, which is absolutely fair play to him and his team. That is an incredible salary for him to get. And I just don't think Chelsea would have gone near that. By all accounts, they were kind of putting him around the top earners at the club. Now, let's take Sterling out of that equation because he's a little bit of a wild card at this point. I don't think many more contracts like that will be offered and in the current model. So I think he'd probably been offered around the kind of Casado and Enzo money, which by all accounts is about that 120k a week offer. I think he was on 70 or so at the moment. So a really good bump, but meaning he's in that kind of realm. And clearly Chelsea would not have gone up to that 200k level, which is, I think, would have become a big part of the decision for him. And for his family and his club, like his agents, completely fair play to them for wanting to get the best possible deal for him. But Chelsea were never going to do that. And I think that's where some of the talk about him being a squad option, a squad player, etc. comes from. That kind of money would only be offered to, for example, a Cole Palmer probably, where, you know, he's absolutely first name on the team sheet, he's going to play every game. I think we know that that's unlikely to be would have been the case for Gallagher with how much competition there is in that midfield now, with obviously Dewsbury Hall being signed as well. I think Chelsea would have loved to have kept him, but I think around that lower salary band and not kind of break the cap. So I think that's an important thing to say in all this. And this is not to have a go at Gallagher at all. I think anyone in any walk of life and profession would be looking to get top money, particularly at his age. It's a brilliant deal for him. But I think that this idea that Chelsea have forced him out and all that kind of stuff, I think is a little bit off the mark. The second part of that as well is linked to this idea that you want to keep players, and I would have loved to have kept players like Gallagher around as a really strong squad option. So I think I talked about it on a previous pod, comparing him to like a Darren Fletcher back in the day at Man United, who was such a great option for Alex Ferguson. He'd bring him on. He'd play virtually every game, wouldn't he? He'd get 20 minutes here, he'd start with certain big games and be a really useful closing player. Also a great person to have around the training ground, a real one club kind of man. And I think that whilst I'd have loved Gallagher to be that, we talked about it on a previous pod where we said, don't blame Chelsea, blame the rules. And I think that is exactly true here, because I just don't think those sort of players are likely to exist anymore. When you look at someone like a Fletcher, he might have been worth 30 million to Man United back then. And I think in the current market, they'd have probably sold him because of the PSR rules and the fact that that's pure profit. And I think with someone like Gallagher now, where you're looking at him saying, well, he is a really important, useful squad option, but he's worth 42 million euros, I think it is, in pure profit. I think the club almost has to take those sort of offers in order to then better invest in people like Esteval Willian and Paez and those other players that we're very excited about. So it's actually something that Enzo Maresca talked about in the pre-match press conference, and I'll play that in now.
But this is not Chelsea problem. This is not Chelsea problem. This is the rules problems. All the clubs in this moment, they are almost compulsory to sell players from the academy because of the rules. It's all the Premier League club problem. And I also think that the intention of the club is not to sell players from the academy, but it's the rules that at the end you have to do it. And it's a shame because Totti with Roma. He was 20 years with the same club. I love that. We all love that in football. And the fans, they love that because they want to see them in that player. But because of the rules, probably something now it's different from compared to the past.
And the final thing that I wanted to say about the Gallagher piece, and it links to the Chalobah one as well, is the social media rhetoric about feeling incredibly sorry for these guys and they're being forced out of their club and all of that kind of stuff. And maybe I'm heartless, but I think that's football. This is what happens in all levels of football. Clubs move players all the time in and out, whether you're a boyhood fan of the club or not. That's just what happens. And actually, the guys that I feel sorry for when that happens are the 16-year-olds, the 15-year-olds, the guys who are now having to fight for their life in football to try and find another club. If I'm being honest, I don't feel massively sorry for Gallagher or Chalobah, who I love to bits, but both of them are going to be absolutely fine. They're going to go to big clubs, as we've seen with Gallagher, and I'm sure Chalobah will do as well. They're going to be on tens of £1,000s a week. They'll be absolutely fine. And whilst both brilliant club men will come down as, real stars of the Chelsea Academy, I don't really buy this kind of idea that Chelsea owe them something, the club owe them something because they've come through the academy system. I think that is just football. And ultimately, as fans, whilst we will be really upset about it for now, if come the end of the season, let's say Chelsea go on to win some trophies, have a great season, and Dewsbury Hall has a brilliant season in place of Gallagher, and Tosin ends up being a really top centre-back option instead of Chalobah, none of us are going to look back on this with any great sadness. That we'll just be very pragmatic that's the nature of football. So that makes me sound a bit heartless, doesn't it? But I just think I just think Chelsea as a club are being painted as a bit of a villain in the piece here. And kind of as Maresca said in his press conference, this is the something that I think we're going to see from a lot of clubs going forward. I think those kind of squad players that have come through the academy are going to be sold by a lot of clubs. And Chelsea just at the moment are at kind of the front of the queue for this. But I would very much expect that unless the rules change in the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be pretty commonplace, unfortunately. And again, I say unfortunately because I think it is flawed and the rules 100% need changing, because have a system where clubs are incentivized to sell their academy players is let's be honest, it's lunacy. But yeah, that's my thoughts on it. So we talked earlier in the summer about the rise in swap deals when the Kellyman and Maatsen deal effectively happened with Aston Villa. And it looks very much to be the same case with Atletico Madrid, with Conor Gallagher going there and Spanish striker Samu Omorodion coming to Chelsea for effectively the same fee, although they are separate deals. Now, Joe and I will admit we did not and do not know a huge amount about the new striker, but we found a man who does. So Joe and I came across an amazing thread on Twitter a couple of days ago from football analyst and writer Fahd Ahmed, all about Samu's strengths, how he could fit in at Chelsea. And Fahd has been kind enough to come on as a guest for this episode to give us a bit of a breakdown of what you could expect to see from Samu and how he thinks he'll fit in amongst Chelsea's current options. So thank you again, Fahd, and over to you.
Hello everyone, I'm Fahd, and in the short voice note, I'll be exploring Chelsea's latest acquisition, 20-year-old striker Samu Omorodion. I'll be discussing a specific reason why Chelsea signed him, that is, how he complements Nicholas Jackson's tactical profile. But before I delve into that, I'll be looking into some key differentiating areas, and then I'll explain what Omorodion offers that Jackson does not yet. The most important quality of a striker is their ability in front of goal, specifically their ability to convert chances and convert them consistently. A point of frustration for Chelsea fans last season was Jackson's underperformance in this regard. He was both unreliable and inconsistent. So one would quickly ask, how does Omorodion differ here? Well, in terms of efficiency, it is still too early to tell with only one season's worth of match footage and data. However, from what we've seen, he has not yet demonstrated prolific finishing over a consistent period. At 20 years old, there's still much room to improve, hence we cannot really say anything conclusively yet. Nevertheless, there's still one attribute of Omorodion's that I really like, and I think it's a huge benefit for Chelsea, tactically speaking. So when I analyze Nicholas Jackson's 2023-24 season, I noticed his low shot volume, but high shot quality. So that is, his shots per game would be quite low. However, the quality of shot, which is measured by non-penalty XG by shot, was pretty high. And this corroborated my observation from last season, where I would notice Jackson's hesitancy in front of goal. And so he would always wait for the perfect opportunity before pulling the trigger. But this can be a point of frustration, because in the penalty box, when there are tighter spaces to operate in, when you have lesser time to make your decision as well, sometimes you need your striker to gamble, and Omorodion likes to take that bet. From last season, Omorodion showed his ability to quickly create separation between the defenders and quickly launch a shot as well. So against low blocks, this is a quality that you would like to have in your striker, and that's something Omorodion has displayed last season. This is something I'll touch upon at the end as well. The other important attribute of Omorodion is his aerial presence. Although Nicholas Jackson with 3-headed goals has showed his ability to execute those guided headers, Omorodion is just a level above him in terms of aerial presence, aerial dominance, and being more of a threat against the opposition centre-backs. And so Nicholas Jackson, again, underperformed in this regard for me. He was not the aerial threat who you could consistently rely on against lower blocks when there are tall defenders to tower over before scoring a goal. But again, Omorodion has shown potential in this regard, and I think in the short term as well, he'll definitely deliver for Chelsea in this department. And so from a tactical perspective, I quite like the signing of Omorodion, because his tactical profile goes hand in hand with that of Nicholas Jackson, in the sense of where one player's strength is the other player's weakness. And so this provides a lot of tactical flexibility for Enzo Maresca in game as well as from a week-to-week basis. At 20 years old, Omorodion, like many other Chelsea signings, has immense potential, and he will need time to integrate into the squad and embed into the new culture that he will have to familiarize himself with. But he's the one I'm excited about, and I can't wait to see what he can achieve in Chelsea Blue.
So a US tour has finally come to an end in slightly disappointing fashion. I think we all would have loved to have seen a victory, or certainly a good draw last night, like you said, Chris, in your last note regarding this game. But it wasn't to be. The scoreline wasn't too dreadful. You know, a 2-1 loss to Real Madrid is never that bad, but like we said, that's kind of not where we're aiming to be. I mean, hopefully going forward, we can start to see a slight change of mentality with how we're approaching these bigger games. Now, I know the manager's essentially playing players in different positions. He's trialing them out to see where their strengths and weaknesses lie, which is completely fine. And if you can never do it now, then you'll never be able to do it in the season. So if people often say about the England manager on international friendlies, you know, why is he playing there, or why is this guy playing? You know, it's because they need to see if they're up to it. And sometimes the bigger occasion can kind of swallow you up. So I think trialing these players in these, let's say, slightly odd positions at times is never a bad thing, because you might strike upon something that's actually really interesting to you. But what I have to say is that when we play Inter Milan next week, there has to be I would suggest, a change in tact with the way they approach the game, because I think the Stamford Bridge faithful, even though it's a friendly and there won't be quite as much kind of anger and kind of resentment if we don't win the game, but there will still be an element of fans basically going, what are you doing? I mean, if the two centre-backs play the way they did against Inter Milan, as they did last night against Real Madrid, they're going to be in for it, because unfortunately, Badiashile and Colwill were really poor, and there's no getting away from it. Unfortunately, Badiashile has this really bad trait of essentially never looking over his shoulder. He seems to be someone that he's always just very square, and by square, if you imagine yourself looking at a front door and your shoulders pointing at the door frame, That's what I mean. So essentially, his body shape is always really angled, looking at the ball. You know, when you're kids, you're classed as ball chasing. You need to be aware of your surroundings. And last night, particularly for the opening goal, you see how he is basically drawn towards the ball. He has no idea that the Real Madrid forward is behind him. And it wasn't like the guy made an amazing run. It was just, he just waltzed into the box. And the ball just it was a pretty poor shot, and it got deflected off Gusto, and it went between Colwill and Badiashile. And they had no idea the guy was there. And he I'm not even sure if that guy got the last touch, but he would have put it in if the shot hadn't been going in anyway. And it just proves that they're just so unaware of their surroundings. And for that first goal as well, Colwill has to be mentioned, because I mentioned in my last voice note about what I wanted to see for this game was recovery runs. And if anybody wants to go back, if they haven't seen it, watch Levi Colwill. When Madrid break from the halfway line, Colwill just saunters back into the 18-yard box. It is embarrassing. It's really embarrassing. And I don't know if they're being asked to do this or what. But when I played, once that whistle went, I kind of, friendly or not, your instinctive, competitive nature takes over. And I just feel as though that last night was really bad. I mean, if you watch it, they both get drawn to the ball for that first goal, and it's amateurish. I'm just blown away by how poor that goal was to concede. And I don't want to get too irate about it, because I say these are friendlies, but unfortunately you have to start clearing this nonsense up, because it really was bad. And then for the second goal we concede, and by the way, we love to concede 2 goals in the first 15, 20 minutes of a game, don't we, at the moment? The Diaz, it just literally runs off the back of Colwill, and Colwill doesn't go with him. No interest in going with him. He goes round Jorgensen, and Badiashile, this hasn't been mentioned, but Diaz just slides the ball across and the ball goes in. Badiashile makes no attempt to clear that ball off the line. In my opinion, 10 times out of 10, he could make that goal line clearance. But he made no attempt to, and I couldn't understand it. And it hasn't been picked up by anybody. It's like they just said, "Oh, Diaz, he goes around the goal. It's a wonderful finish." It was all right. He goes around the goalkeeper and he slides it in. I don't think it was that amazing, personally. And I thought that the defender did not cover himself in glory. So for both goals, both centre backs, I mean, really poor. And if this is the partnership that we're going to go in against Man City on opening day, then that's going to be a real worry to me. This has to be cleared up, because it's I would say, one of the most important places on the field that you need your smart, your tactically aware players to be. And at the moment, those two are a million miles away. And if you throw Fofana into the mix, he too has not been up to scratch either. So I would say big worries at centre-back for Chelsea. Maybe they're going to come out against Inter Milan and they're going to prove everybody wrong. But at the moment, just based on what I saw last night and the games previously, that's a worrying area of the field where we haven't actually improved all pre-season.
Always really fascinating to hear you talk about centre-backs. For those who don't know, Joe played centre-back at a very high level, maybe one for another episode that we'll talk about a little bit more about that. But yeah, really interesting to hear that. And I look back at the goals actually after you said it, and yeah, in equal ways, just a bit embarrassing. The way that Colwill, I mean, he saunters, doesn't he, for that first goal? There's just no urgency at all to get back. And that Badiashile one off the goal line, I mean, Thiago Silva at 39 was doing that, you know, and classic John Terry, Ashley Cole era, they'd have got that ball. He doesn't even sprint to try and get it off the line. It's really weird, actually, when you look at it. So, yeah, I think a little bit alarming, if we're being honest, is probably the performance of the centre-backs over the course of pre-season. Those two have basically done those kind of performances, but Sheila always looks flat-footed, doesn't he? Really, and very square, as you said. I really like Colwill. A lot of hope for him, but for me, he's always too relaxed and too casual. defensively. Looks great when he's got the ball, but off the ball, he always just feels a bit too casual for me. And I think I'd like to see him do a bit more. Fofana has looked pretty off the pace consistently in pre-season. They're clearly managing his minutes and trying to, which is sensible, and be gradually reintegrate him, but he's generally looked just a little bit slow, which is a concern after the serious injuries he's had. And Tosin, obviously the big new signing. Tosin looked good against Club America, but against Man City looked quite concerning, actually, and alarming at times. So yeah, he's not filled you with huge confidence yet. And then Disasi's obviously been injured, and I never thought I'd be wishing for Disasi to be the great hope, but at the moment you look at him and think, well, actually he does have some of those qualities that maybe we've been lacking. So really concerning at the back there. And it was one of the big things we said at the end of last season, wasn't it, that with Thiago Silva going, we'd like to have seen Chelsea go in the market and bring in an experienced centre-back and someone who could come in and really, I guess, lead that back four more than anything. We didn't do it, and that is definitely the number one concern going into the new season. I mean, going forward, you'd like to see us score a few more goals, but you also know that you've got Palmer coming back, you've got Jackson coming back. Actually, at times we've looked quite good going forward, just the final touch not being there, and clearly we're in the market for a striker, which we'll talk about later in this pod. But yeah, defensively massively concerning, and the high line piece as well, which you've really seen in pre-season. How easily we've been carved open and balls in behind happen again and again against Real Madrid, likewise against Celtic and City. And Maresca actually was asked about it after the game and said it's a hangover from last season that they're playing that way. It's not what he necessarily wants, which is concerning in its own way. But yeah, you really hope for improvement again in the Inter game, which we'll talk about now.
I think what I really want to see now from the Inter Milan game is not necessarily a victory. That would be fantastic. We definitely can't get beat. I think that would be really a sad way to end our pre-season, with one win in, 6 matches, and they weren't a particularly good side. And I just feel as though losing can become a habit. And you know what it's like, if you, whatever level of football you play, if you concede the opening goal on opening day against Man City, you're going to get the fans just going, oh, here we go again. We've done this all pre-season. We've started a goal down inside, let's say, the first 5 or 10 minutes. Haaland looks great, and Foden looked good, and De Bruyne's pulling the strings, and everyone's going to be thinking, oh no, what is going to happen here? And what you don't want is the crowd to be almost immediately kind of on the team's back and on the manager's back, which is something I really don't think we should be doing. I think the players will feel that home support against Inter Milan for good and for bad. And if they start the game 2-0 down, or they have done for most of pre-season, inside the first 5 to 20 minutes, you're going to feel a bit of an edge to the crowd, and it won't help. So I think they've really got to come out, be positive, try and get that first goal, and kick on and sort of put in a performance that's worthy of them, because they are a good team. They are a good bunch of players, and lots of supporters are writing Chelsea off. Some of our own fans are writing us off, saying that, this is the worst team they've seen for a long time, and this player's no good, and we used to have this player, and this player's not as good as him. You can't compare, Lampard to Dewsbury Hall or whatever. It just doesn't work. It's a new era, it's a new team, it's a whole new ownership and a different way of doing things. So, unfortunately, those days have gone, but it doesn't mean that these days won't ever come back. And they've got to start somewhere, and I think this is as good a place as any. Get yourself a good result against Inter Milan, go in with some confidence against Man City, and let's see if we can get a good victory on opening day. Hopefully we don't get beat, and let's have a good solid foundation to begin from. So come on, Chelsea.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me is just continuing that momentum at Stamford Bridge that we did build at the end of last season, in fairness, which was actually feeling a bit more like a fortress again. And certainly the atmosphere was much, much better. Going to games feeling pretty confident that we'd be put a good display. And it was actually away from home where we had more problems, wasn't it, at the end of last season? So, yeah, I think as much as it's friendly, just having that feeling that we're back home and actually that's where we do our best work would be great. Obviously, we hope to see people like Palmer get some minutes, Jackson, Cucurella perhaps as well, and just start to feel like, okay, it's a bit more of a familiar first team lineup. And being one game left of pre-season, let's try and avoid injury as well, because one thing I would say is that has been a big positive of pre-season, that we've really not picked up any injuries. When you think about what happened last season, it was a running joke, wasn't it, week to week, of just the number of injuries we were picking up. So whatever they've been doing in terms of managing loads and that sort of stuff has been obviously working, as you talked about in the last pod. For what it's worth, I think it's a really smart game as well to have. Something we've seen under previous managers, Conte, Mourinho, and having that game at Stamford Bridge before the start of the season, I think is really good for the new players and the new manager, just to kind of get used to the surroundings. It means that come that City game, they're not, you know, all the silly stuff, isn't it? You know where the dressing rooms are, you know your way out, you know what you're doing. So I think it's smart, and hopefully with a good result, it means you go into that first game of the season with just a little bit more, I guess, hope and optimism about the club as well, which we had going into pre-season. It starts to fade a little bit, like you say, as people start to write us off inside and outside of the media. But a good result against Inter, and it's funny how quickly things are forgotten. And I think it's been talked about a little bit. Maresca was asked about it, but these tours are so difficult, aren't they, for all clubs, but it's not just Chelsea, but certainly for new managers to try and get their ideas across. There's so many games, so much travel as well. I mean, I think we're going to have to get used to it. I don't think they're going away. I think it's great for obviously fans over in the US as well. A lot of our listeners are from the US, so thank you for listening in. It's brilliant for them to get a chance to see the club, but in terms of pre-season preparation, it's really not ideal, and I think that has to be considered when people are looking too closely at the results. It's difficult. It's a difficult thing, and Maresca kind of said that in his pre-match conference, didn't he? That the real pre-season work is going to be done on the training pitch at Cobham. So yeah, I think I'd expect to see quite a different look in Chelsea when it comes to actually the season starting for real, and again, a little bit less experimentation obviously at that point, and hopefully a much more coherent performance on the pitch. Hey, it's Chris here with a really quick message. Check us out on Instagram at 1905 Podcast. You'll find video clips, photos, and much more about everything we discuss on the show. Plus, it's a great way to get in touch, to tell us your thoughts, share your feedback, or just say hi. Follow us on Instagram at 1905 Podcast. And now, back to the show. So we end the episode, as always, with a question. And this week's question came in from Steve Keehee via email. So thanks for the question, Steve. You can send your own questions in to us via Instagram or email, which is hello@1905podcast.com. And all the links are in the notes for the show. So Steve's question is, what is your favourite ever Chelsea goal? And Steve's put in brackets, one for an emotional reaction to a goal and one in terms of skill. So Joe, I'm going to hand this one over to you. Give us your answer.
Yeah, firstly, I'd like to thank everybody for their listener questions that are coming in. And this one is a really hard question. Let's just start, because it's a personal choice. Everyone has their own opinions. And obviously this isn't to say that someone else wouldn't agree or disagree. But I think if I start with the emotional attachment, now there's obviously plenty of these down the line. Again, we can all point to certain matches, Champions League finals and semi-finals, and maybe FA Cup wins, league title winning teams that have, you could argue Frank Lampard against Bolton, but I don't know. I remember a moment where we were kind of on the rise and the team was really pushing, and you thought we had to get over this hump of kind of being not nearly men, because we were sort of doing well, but you felt as though if we could beat this team, which was that amazing Arsenal team in 2004, that we could really go on, and maybe not necessarily in that season, although we all dreamed, but the years beyond that would be kind of ours to kind of conquer. And it was that Champions League quarter-final against Arsenal in 2004 when Wayne Bridge goes through in the 87th minute, plays that little 1-2 with Good Johnson through the legs of, it might have been Lauren, or maybe at the back, and he buried it into the bottom corner, and he obviously wheeled away in absolute ecstasy. And it was like everybody on the bench. Ranieri had tears in his eyes. And I won't lie, I'm pretty sure that day I may have shed a tear, because I don't think Arsenal had been beaten, particularly at home, for a long time. And just beating them generally around that time was really difficult. It was one of the best sort of Premier League teams we've ever seen. And they were just destructive. They were a bit like us in some ways. They were destructive, horrible, big, and strong to play against. But again, they had players like Henry, and they could tear you apart in all the other ways too. So going there and then watching all the players after the game go to the crowd at Highbury. And I got to say, I did love Highbury as a ground. I know it wasn't as big as the Emirates and things, but like real proper atmosphere. And when you went and got a big away win against anybody, but against Arsenal, against that team, and all the emotion it kind of brought out on us. We had a Champions League semi-final beckoned, which we made a bit of a mess of, I know, but I think as an emotional attachment, that goal probably stands out as one that I really remember as a younger man. And yeah, it was outstanding. I would just like to say, before I get to the second part of the question, a goal that from an emotional standpoint that really came close, and it has to be mentioned for me, was the Ivanovic winner against Napoli at home in the Champions League. There, it was a game we never thought we'd win, or we thought we had very little chance, because Napoli was a very, very good team. And I watched that game with yourself and our good friend Andy at your house in Thames Ditton there. And I mean, when that Ivanovic winner went in, we were like kids, weren't we? It was just incredible. We really felt as though we could walk on air. It was an amazing night. I'll never forget it. We've been to the pub beforehand, a few beers at your house, watching that. And, I think it was Lampard and Terry scored as well on the day, which was fantastic. And yeah, it was kind of after the AVB debacle, and it was just a very special goal. And I thought I really had to mention that, because it was one that always stands out. But onto my best goal, I think just remember that people like a 30-yard curler, some like a shot from kind of distance that flies in the top corner, some like a team goal. But I think the one that really stands out for me is that Eden Hazard goal against West Ham in 2019, because it was just such a thing of beauty. The way he picked the ball up about 20 or 30 yards outside the West Ham box, he just takes it on, he goes past one, he goes past two, he slaloms past another two, and just bangs it in the corner like it's nothing. And I think we'll have to remember that this guy was, at that time in his career, absolutely one of the top 2 or 3 players in the world. He was, in my opinion, he was right there. He was never talked about it, because Messi and Ronaldo were doing their amazing things too, but Hazard, without any question, was on that same plane. And I think if you ask any Chelsea fan about their favourite goal, that will almost certainly be in their minds. And I've never actually seen West Ham fans, not all of them mind, but some of them actually turned around and clapped that goal. That's how good it was. And for them to do that, then that must have been special, because as we know, they don't like us very much. But yeah, I have to mention that one. I think it's just one of them wonderful finishes. He did it twice against Liverpool, away from home. He's done it in that pre-season goal you mentioned the other day. He had a knack for just doing that, just gliding past players. Hopefully we can see a bit of Nkunku do that in our current Chelsea team, which seems to be, he has that kind of talent too. So hopefully we can see some more fantastic goals from him. But yeah, the Eden Hazard goal in 2019, without any question, was my favourite ever goal.
Those were the Chelsea notes for this week. If you enjoyed the podcast, do us a favour and share it with a fellow Blue. And we'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave us a review wherever you're listening. Wherever you may be, stay carefree, and remember, every little thing's gonna be alright.